So both your skin and phytoplankton, so these guys, phytoplankton, produce a molecule that has an evolutionary history upwards of 750 million years old. Can you guess what that molecule is? If you guessed vitamin D, you are correct. In the early atmosphere, so early Earth, the atmosphere had relatively low amounts of ozone within the atmosphere, which caused UVB radiation to penetrate down into the early oceans, causing these phytoplankton that had sterols within their membrane. So sterols are these chemicals where they're 1, 2, 3, 4 rings kind of fused together. Sterols are present within the membrane. And when UVB radiation penetrated into the early oceans, it caused sterols that were situated in the membranes of these early phytoplankton to undergo chemical conversions in the presence of UVB radiation. Some of those chemical conversions converted what's called 7-dehydrocholesterol or provitamin D3 into a more active form of vitamin D called cholecalciferol. This isn't the active form that's biologically active in eukaryotic mammalian cells, but it's an active form in terms of its signaling capacity in other sorts of cells like photosynthetic cells, similar to these guys, the phytoplankton. So cyanobacteria will have vitamin D3 in their membranes as a result of UVB radiation. And so vitamin D3 is extremely ancient, as well as the vitamin D3 receptor. And this allows organisms that were present on the early Earth to respond to changing levels of UVB radiation. So imagine I have UVB radiation coming down. It's exciting the membrane of a cell. So imagine this is my cell right here. And so if UVB radiation is present, I'm increasing the rate that I'm converting a sterol like 7-dehydrocholesterol into vitamin D. So vitamin D could be a proxy for the amount of UVB radiation in the environment. And UVB radiation is dangerous for cells because it increases the likelihood that thymine will react with other thymine molecules within DNA to form thymine dimers. So it's introducing mutations into DNA. It also increases the rate at which reactive oxygen species are produced. And the amount of reactive oxygen species within a cell is indicative of the amount of uncontrolled chemistry. And so cells are all about controlling their chemistry, so facilitating reactions that are beneficial for growth, differentiation, proliferation. But if I introduce reactive oxygen species, they're preventing the cell from doing its normal upkeep and its normal enzymatic activity. So if I have vitamin D around and I have this vitamin D receptor that's evolved, I can allow my cell to respond to changing levels of UVB radiation due to this little intermediate called vitamin D. And so there's these organisms called lamprey right here, and they're primitive organisms in the sense that they have diverged from other vertebrates or chordates. And so this is an example of a specific Pacific lamprey, but the lamprey, they diverged a very long time ago, and they still have the vitamin D receptor, as well as these organisms called tunicates, which are chordates. So they're related to us phylogenetically, but they lack a spinal cord, so they're invertebrates, but they still have a homologue of a vitamin D receptor. So they don't necessarily have the vitamin D receptor itself, but they have something that acts very similarly. And so vitamin D can act as a UV damage sensor. It can induce, if vitamin D is present, that means UVB radiation is likely present. So it can induce behavioral changes. So imagine this were an early ocean. This is my early ocean. Oops, I'll draw like this. This is my early ocean. These are the little waves. And then I have a little organism that's down within the ocean. And let's say this is a photosynthetic bacteria. If UVB radiation is present, it's coming down, it's exciting the membrane of this little photosynthetic bacteria, increasing the rate that this photosynthetic bacteria produces vitamin D. That vitamin D can bind to the vitamin D receptor, initiate a behavioral change where this little bacteria will then go down deeper in the water column in order to avoid the UVB radiation that's present, because that UVB radiation poses a risk to that organism evolutionarily. So it increases the likelihood of DNA mutations, lipid oxidation. It could increase the likelihood that proteins are deformed, changing their shape, therefore their function. It could introduce uncontrolled chemistry through reactive oxygen species. So this is an example of a behavioral response where vitamin D could have acted as kind of the intermediate to educate the cell on the environment. And so vitamin D can also act as a sunscreen. So right here, it can act as a sunscreen in the sense that vitamin D is produced in the presence of UV radiation. And vitamin D, D2, and D3 have a similar absorption spectra to UV light. So if you have a bunch of vitamin D in the membrane, it can act as a sunscreen in the sense that it's able to absorb some of the photons that are present in UV light at that specific wavelength, preventing that UV light from interacting with DNA or different proteins or lipids within the membrane or whatever. And then there's kind of a broad evolutionary trend for vitamin D causing cell cycle arrest. So it's preventing the mitotic division of cells. So it's preventing cells from dividing, preventing cells from creating new copies of themselves, because it's indicative that UVB radiation is present in the environment. Therefore, now is not a good time to reproduce. Now would be a better time to increase the amount of the transcription of genes associated with the regulation or the differentiation of the cell. So it's increasing its protection, it's increasing antioxidant related genes, gene transcription. So overall, it's saying that now is not a good time to reproduce necessarily, but now is a good time to survive or focus on survival. So it's a fundamental trade-off in biology between reproduction and survival. Thanks.